He's a phenomenal artist. If you were here for the opening reception, you know how amazing everything went. I feel like tonight we'll be able to get a deeper understanding of who he is as a person, as an artist, and the other many things that he does as well. So let's give him a warm welcome. Okay, so I guess the first thing we all want to know is, maybe some of us already know, but where are you from? How did you get started in this form of art?
So I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. The town that I was born and raised is Santurce, Puerto Rico, and the specific barrio is called Barrio Obrero, which is, it translates to like the laborer's town. And it indeed is like a very blue-collar worker town. Like my dad, rest in peace, was a carpenter, construction worker, and everyone in that area is very much either a welder, like a carpenter, name it. They take a lot of pride in that. Yeah, and I migrated to the United States when I was 12. I was back in 1990. My exposure to hip-hop culture, which style writing, also known as graffiti, is one of the elements of it. I was exposed to it when I lived in Puerto Rico, and the explosion of the movies Beat Street, Star Wars, Wild Style. These were the movies that made it popular to the world, right? It was a movement that was happening in New York City, right, where it was created, and then the rest of the world got privy to it by way of either, people that lived in New York and then went back home, right? So in Puerto Rico, it was being brought over by what we call our New Yorkers, right? So like a cousin of a cousin will come out to the island, and we're like, why is this guy wearing fat laces? And be like, oh, there's a movement happening called hip hop. And then they're like, why is your cousin spinning on his head? Like, that's cool, but it's weird. Right. And then the movies come out, and then we kind of get a gist of what that movement was. So for me, that first connection to it, it left that impression on me that now, at 46, is part of my life. It changed my life.
So when you and I were talking about cultivating or curating this show, you did make notes, because I was saying, well, it's graffiti. I want a graffiti artist. But he did make it clear to me that it is called style writing. So can you elaborate a little bit more about the history of style writing, and I guess why we have moved to call it?
Yeah, so, I'm going to attach a couple of things, because I'm also a Bboy, aka breakdancer, and there's a parallel to how things are called in hip hop culture based from the media, and just to kind of convey the message to the masses. And then there's a parallel with style writing, also aka graffiti. So to be able to have kind of like a straightforward conversation with someone, we'll say graffiti because people, they go graffiti. The thing was scraping, right? Internally for us, in our culture, this is such an intricate and like technological, futuristic form that we call it style writing, because we're taking fonts that already exist, and we're taking the structure and the foundation of letters, and we're adding our own, right? So one of our legends said once, to call it graffiti, it's almost like, I don't think he meant disrespect, but it's like a kid could do graffiti. If a kid takes a crayon and writes on a wall in school, stop doing that graffiti. So it kind of takes the value away from what we're doing, like we're taking our time to honor the letter structure and how, the arrows and the connects flow in our pieces, how our vanishing points in 3D, how they work in reference to technical aspects of letter structure. So for us, to honor what we do, we call it style writing. We're writing with style. But again, to the masses, is known as graffiti. The same thing happened to breaking or B-boy and B-girl. The media saw it. They were like, they interviewed someone and they said, we're break boys or break girls, because we are dancing to the break of the record. And that reporter said, they're break dancing. And so it became this thing that's, to us, we're like, ugh, you know, like we don't want that. So there's that parallel with that word.
I guess with your style writing, do you have any, I feel like I met a couple on your opening night, any major influences, or I guess not really now, but what or who were a few of your models?
Personal inspiration to me is, you know, my first mentor who taught me about everything that I'm speaking of right now, right? He's a style writer that goes by Ewok1. He's also part of my crew, Skill Methodz. He was able to draw the parallel for me to understand the difference between proper letter structure and kind of weak letter structure. So a good teacher will use something that you're familiar with, right? And use that to be able to teach you and convey a message. So he would say, you know, you're this world-renowned b-boy, and you know the difference between style and lack of style, between foundation and lack of foundation. So he'll say, okay, look at this b-boy, and he'll show me old school dude, Ken Swift. He's like the epitome of breaking. I'm like, got it. And then he'll show me someone who's not as developed as a breaker. And I was like, oh, that kind of almost hurts watching. And then he'll show me 2 graffiti pieces. And he goes, that's Ken Swift, and that's that guy that's not yet there. So Ewok himself, I could tell that he was a version of that, like a complete, his foundation. But the person who he showed me the piece, his name is Dash, who happens to be the current president of FC, a crew who I would later become a member of. FC Fame City, legendary graffiti crew, and oddly enough, when Ewok used that as a reference, I had already met Dash in 1997. This was for reference, that thing happened in 2005, that conversation with Ewok. Dash I met in Miami in 1997 in the breaking world. He's very connected to breaking and grab. And so when he showed me that piece, I knew who it was personally. And it made sense immediately because knowing how he is, like he's such a b-boy persona that I was like, everything clicked. And I was like, got it. So those are 2 of my main inspirations. That you have Scheme. It's another, you know, legendary graffiti artist. Scene, both scenes. There's a scene from a group seen as an SEEN. There's a scene from TC5, who it's like an adjacent family crew of Fame City. And then there's Scene from United Artists. He's in the documentary Style Wars. He's in Style Wars, yeah. It's a great documentary that basically shows the movement in the 80s. It's the second generation, the explosion of hip hop culture. So those, just to name a few. West, who's also, you know, like one of the presidents of FC, another huge influence in me. Teal Steel, who's a b-boy and a style writer, and his brother View 2. These are 2 guys who I knew from the breaking world, but were equivalent badass style writers. So in retrospect, I was like, oh my God, like these guys are dope. You know?
When you create, do you have a preferred medium that you like? I mean, of course, it's obvious you spray paint, but do you mix any other mediums, or what is your preferred medium in your creating?
Yeah, I mean, spray paint, because it's the tool that separates what we do from fine art, if you will, right? Like fine art is in a sense confined to oil and acrylic. For us, right, like this movement where the youth of that era took the spray paint in different nozzles that they were stealing from, like easy off cans, or like their mom's hairspray aerosol cans. They were figuring out how to get different diameters at that time. There wasn't a market for graffiti spray paint. They were buying spray paint for cars or whatever spray paint was used for, and then being like, the nozzle is blasting too much, and like experimenting with nozzles from other aerosol products. So I personally prefer to honor the art form with spray paint. That's why that piece is all done with spray paint. Same thing with that one back there, right? Moving forward, when we do smaller scale stuff, I then use acrylic. And then at home, when I sketch, up until I got my iPad, that makes it a bit easier. I do like pen rather paper and pencil. I love pencil. I love the pencils. I love the way it looks. I love getting like, you know, the charcoal, you know, on my hand and just kind of like getting the smudge that you're not supposed to get. But I love that because I'm like, it's done by my hand, you know, and even the error, there's beauty in the error. You know what I mean? So
we talked a little bit about how there's certain markings that you can clean up and that you prefer more kind of
just to leave them
cleaner, but then there are others that you want that splatter or that blurred or that unclean finish. So what determines what gets a cleaner cut versus
like that one would be a better example. So first and foremost, I'll start with that part of the question. What determines what I clean or don't clean? To me is the letter is first. So the corners where I need to clean up the letter so that I can convey what letter that is, I'm gonna cut back. So that's the beginning of a T, right? The T is kind of has like this elbow kind of thing. That corner, those corners of the T, I personally like to clean that up so that I can convey the fact that the letter is indeed that letter. The parts inside, like the bubbles, or like there's that white, those white little, I call those, that's like my war paint. My inspiration from that is like, you know, native people's war paint. That's where my influence is that for those little isms. Those, I don't like to clean that much because that's my way of showing the viewer that I did that with the cap of spray paint. So what tends to happen for those guys, those of you guys that are closer to that bigger piece, if you look at the purple pieces, especially in the T, the first letter there in the stem, I could go back with either the orange or the red and make those like really sharp 90-degree angles. I choose not to because I again want to show that I executed that 90-degree angle in the four corners with just the tip of the spray paint. Right? If I go back with either the orange or the red, I can cut back and make it like laser precision. I personally don't want that. You know what I mean? To me, that's the equivalent of like whoever, Picasso or so-and-so leaving the brush stroke. You know, right now with like, we have digital art, we have all this AI, and it's like really removing the human factor from art. With graph, it's not only, we not only kind of like set for failure because we can't cut back with a brush, although we can cut back with a spray paint. It's such a wide tool, you know, even with ultra skin caps that I'm like, this is what kind of like, if we got into this post-apocalypse thing, right? This is the remnant of what the human hand is capable of doing. So that's kind of like in my mind, it goes to all these different places, right? Like the human hand, look what we're able to achieve.
So how has your work changed, I guess, from when you started versus now when we did the Vanishing Point collection, which blew me away when I first saw it, and the fact that you created it within weeks.
My wife, she laughed because she was like, you have a whole gallery show that you committed to do? Like, what the hell are you doing?
But it's amazing how things evolved.
So, you know, I think the question to that in part was when you and I first spoke on the phone, I spoke a little bit about this, right? I think what has helped evolve my work is the current state of graffiti, the graffiti world, right? So down in Miami every year you have Art Basel, there's a whole graffiti museum. You have Nike and every other brand collaborating with either legendary graffiti artists or, you know, guys and women that just kind of blow up, which is awesome. I mean, you've had Louis Vuitton, Gucci, they've all done a collaboration with street art or graffiti. From the outside looking in, it's a little bit bittersweet. And I'll explain why. Because when I see the evolution of people who I admire, some who I know, some who I've never met, when they get into that space of these opportunities with these really great brands, it looks like their work is ashamed to be graffiti. So they go, oh, I now got a contract to do a collaboration with Gucci. And then they don't do this. They'll do like a flower with dripping spray paint, you know, or like the Gucci G with like stencil and like really splattered paint. And it's like, you never did that on a train. You never did that on a wall. Like, what's happening here? You're now the artist that you have more paint on your clothes than you do on the wall. And so hip hop, because there's generations in hip hop, right? And every generation, the youth kind of dictates where it's going. This belongs to the youth, but when I was young, my introduction to hip hop was fresh within what you had, like when the things are matching, things are crispy clean, right? Same thing with the pieces. When you guys look at these pieces, there's no like splatter paint all over the place. When I painted these, I have more paint on me than I did on the canvas. So when I see artists that know what this is, and they do that other thing, it's bittersweet. It's like, man, I'm happy, like Gucci and Louis Vuitton, they're doing this, but then they're ashamed. They're ashamed of the letter form. And so my inspiration for my work was like, I said these words to you. This Vanishing Point exhibit is unapologetically a graffiti style writer's show. I wanted to be in a gallery space and be like, this is style writing. Unapologetically. And it's like, you're just gonna do your name over and over? Yes. Because historically, when that youth of that era, when they started writing on trains and walls, if we look at the pictures of the Bronx in the 1970s, it looked like a missile hit the South Bronx. Buildings are, you know, exploded, and mattresses and children trying to play in like straight up rubble. And the youth, they created an instrument, the turntables. They created their own dance, breakdancing, breaking. They created their own art form, graffiti, style writing. They found a tool to do so, spray paint. So to me, I'm like, how could I not honor that when I get the opportunity to be in a gallery space? That's like a slap in the face to the history as I know it. So I will continue to unapologetically be Teknyc the B-boy, as I know breaking to be. And as a style writer, I am going to honor the letter form. This is what it is. I don't want to throw paint and have more paint on me and like, you know, do swirls on a piece of canvas. Like, I'm good on that. It's not me.
Why do you think people steer away from the original form? Like, what is there to be ashamed of? Well, I guess it's clear.
It's whitewashing.
Whitewashing.
It's whitewashing, right? Like, it's like, if I do this, this group of people will accept it as universal. And then, but it's like, it's selling short what this is. So that's separate from an artist going, this is where my evolution as an artist goes. No, like, you finally got the opportunity to have a global audience, and they don't know where you come from. They just know paint all over the place. You know what I'm saying? So there's nothing there for the world to be like, dude, that's a letter T, but it has an arrow. Why did you do that? Because it's architecture. Like, this piece is, you know, my influence behind it is to pull all the best bells and whistles. And I chose the blue because it reminds me of a blueprint. And all the connections, when we look, if you guys ever saw the blueprint for a building and you have like the piping in the rooms and the doors, this is it. And this tells those bougie people that this is indeed an architecture futuristic piece of work. And every single one of us that do this, this is This is the process that we have to go through to create a final piece. So this piece doesn't only represent me, it represents everyone before and after me that chooses to do this art form.
Out of the entire Vanishing Point collection, would you say that this piece speaks to you the most?
That's my favorite piece. That's my favorite piece. It has all the elements. If we see the N, it's clearly a letter N. Can't miss it, right? And then inside of that, like the T, for my dancers in the house, that T is Mr. Wiggles. That's Mr. Wiggles, like doing his, before he goes into whatever, that's literally Mr. Wiggles right there, right? This little flow right here, that's like his leg kind of coming back, doing like the old man, you know what I mean? Like the arrow is broken as to separate what would be the serif of a T, which serif is an actual font. You know, when you guys pick your fonts from your apps, serif, that's a serif. But it's exaggerated because that's what we do in graph, you know what I mean? Ballet dancers, they tippy toe, break dancers do a windmill. That's the equivalent of that. And then following that, there's an arrow because the letter has to protect itself from the haters. You know what I'm saying? Right? So, you know, there's an arrow there, like, yo. So there's offense and defense. At the top, the crew FC, you know, and it's incorporated into the piece. You know, the K is kind of like attached to the E and then here, and you guys will probably see this a lot in letters where we do these little kind of dots. That's a communication between writers, right? We tell other writers that we go, you don't see where this piece is going, but I'm letting you know the hint. It's going right down here, right? So when a thing disappears, like the Y, the nose of the Y is meant to be behind the N. But I'm letting my writers know, like, yo, I know where my Y is, B. Like, my Y exists. It's gonna connect here, right? This thing, this arrow is like, where's that arrow coming from? It's coming from the letter. It goes down and then it comes right back up. So, again, doing this body of work and being unapologetically a style writer show, to me, this is the piece that says, I'm never going to apologize for this art form. Like, I don't need to do the thing that they do. You know what I mean? And, you know, that could be perceived as like me kind of maybe talking bad about other artists. It's a perception. And even more so when I know those artists' body of work and their style and what they're known for, if it goes from here to there really, really fast, it leaves a lot for you to try to figure out, like, how did you go from that to that? How did you go from the letter form to an exploding spray paint flower with the Gucci G in the middle? It's nonsensical. You know what I'm saying? Like, those of you that know me as a dancer, they, you know, my dancers in the house, they know my style, they know Skill Methodz, they know what we stand for. Imagine all of a sudden I just showed up to a jam and there was no rhythm. I just started throwing myself on my elbows. You guys would be like, I have no idea what this guy's doing. You know what I'm saying?
Are there any other pieces? Because I didn't know about you're basically guiding us through this piece, how you explained it.
Yeah.
So are there any other pieces that have, not necessarily what you just explained here, but just like little tidbits that to the untrained eye wouldn't know, because I wouldn't have thought that is meaning, but when you explained that, it's clear to see, yes, it is.
It's a hint. So behind you at the top there, that is now the equivalent of this, but with color. And then the other thing that I did there is an homage to the old school Phase 2 flyers. The old school hip hop flyers where there would be like stars on the corner and the 3D is going to infinity, right? So you see the stars at the top. The stars don't have the 3D, but the famed city, the 3D is going to infinity behind the piece, and so is the piece. Point, I think I talked about this in the show. Vanishing point is, it could be anywhere. So when I do this piece, say I do this piece and I go, my vanishing point is here. That means that all the 3D has to go in that direction, right? So there would have been like black going over here. So for this one, the vanishing point is in the middle. So so it's going to infinity. the old school phase 2 flyers from like the early days of hip hop, there would be like in this like that beige colored paper, I don't know what that was called back in the day, and done with pencil, and it would just go to infinity. Obviously this is colorful, but to attach, you know, to go back to the question, and here is like a futuristic serif kind of going down, right? And there's the hint. The K is like, the K kind of disappeared. No, it didn't. The K is right here, and the back of the K is right there. So now I've added the color, the 3D, all my war paint. I've added my arrow so that the piece protects itself from the hater. So this piece is ready for war, and it comes from hip hop. You know what I'm saying? So like in the gallery space, this piece is like Apache. And I mean that like the literal Apache warrior, you know what I'm saying? Like in the hip hop culture. So it's honoring a lot of things at the same time, you know? And you'll see some pieces that are more simplistic. This is my version of like the early days of graph. It's still a little bit advanced from like the first era of graph, but it's like a straight T with a very simple serif, you know what I mean? And like inside the colors is like literally polka dots, but still the war paint. You know what I mean? So like there's this match between the two.
The last question would be, well, it's twofold. What will you tell an aspiring style writer just getting started? Like what tips would you give them that you didn't have?
You know, when I started, I didn't have access to the information straight away, but I did have access to someone. We were roommates, my buddy Ewok, my mentor. We were actually roommates at that time. So I did and I didn't. I had one person, and luckily it was the right person, a person that's vetted, tried and true and respected. It could have been someone else and maybe the information would have been a little bit off. So I was lucky, but I didn't have immediate access to like the websites or the page, like at that time, I don't recall Instagram being a thing, you know? Now you have the Graffiti Museum. I did not have personal access to, like, at that time, 5 Points. I wasn't living in New York at that time. A little bit later I did, a place to go practice, to go paint. So my advice to, you know, up and coming style writers is learn the history, learn the letter form, you know, understand the history of typography, because with that education, when someone comes at us with like, oh, this chicken scratch, then you could be like, yo, grotesque is a form, a letter that was used in propaganda, and the way that it was built allowed me to create my letter E from the font grotesque or Helvetica. And I could be like, my N is Helvetica, but I added a serif, sans serif, and they'll be like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, because I studied the letter form. I studied typography, I studied propaganda, how it was used to convey messages to people. I'm not doing anything different than that. You like billboards that sell you beauty products, and you like the colors and the fonts in it, I'm letting you know that I exist. This is my pseudonym. This is the name that was given to me, and I gotta take it as high as I can. That's hip hop. No different than corporations using promotion to sell their product. Well, I'm a company. I'm Teknyc. This is what I do, right? And then people kind of get shut down. They're like, and you know, and it's like, and my medium is the spray paint. But don't get it twisted. You want me to design clothing for you? You want me to do a flyer? You want me to do a web design? I could do that digitally because it translates. I want to say this also attached to that. Like, I've taught a few youth classes about this, and when I show them like Photoshop, and then I show them Procreate, which is super easy to use. When I show them that, I pull like the Batman versus Superman movie, the advertisement for that movie at that time. They were using the Batman logo and the Superman logo as if it had been stenciled on a wall by a graffiti artist with a bunch of, you know, drippy spray paint. And I go, look how they use our thing to promote Batman versus Superman. You know what I'm saying? And people are like, they're loving it. They're clashing. They're about to battle each other, you know? But they're using our tool, right? To sell it back to whatever it is that they're trying to sell. You know what I mean? And so there's this duality where people, you know, these companies use our thing, but they don't want to say that it's graph. So I hope that more style writers take this stance that is like unapologetically style writer. This is it, deal with it.
So we all know there's like a stigma connected to style writing and graph and gangs and hood and
Sure.
this, that. How do you separate yourself, or how do you explain
The difference in the,
yeah.
you know, it's like, again, I have to say this in this way. When I say unapologetic, I can't talk out of both sides of my mouth, right? It is vandalism. Me being able to be in a gallery space is the evolution of it being accepted into a gallery space. It started as vandalism because it's a social, economic, political struggle at that time. People who wanted to be heard, that weren't being heard, that didn't have the resources to exist as human beings in the richest country on this planet. So what else do they have to say, I exist, I'm down here in the rubble? You know what I'm saying? Like, I have aspirations, I have color, you know, I have rhythm. You know what I mean? Like, so it came off as vandalism because these people were yelling. These youth are yelling to be heard, to be seen, right? So the duality of like, and the same thing with the gangs, as violent as gangs are, gang graffiti, how they are kind of marking their territory, that is directly attached, as we know now, to a social, economic, and political situations that are done to our communities, right? So then gangs start kind of like marking their territory, right? With like, this is where we're at, and it is vandalism. All we're doing is hoping to evolve past that. A lot of graffiti style writers, graffiti artist style writers, have evolved into being in the political space, into doing outreach work and using their medium to help our communities, you know, like stand up and go and vote for the things that we need. And we're using this medium to get those messages across, right? So, yes, we don't want our youth anymore to be vandals. We want to evolve past that. I think oftentimes it is a part of the process because to this day, there are communities that are trying to be heard. Paramore is right here. We could literally, if we wanted to take a New York City walk, we could. You know what I mean? And those people straight up want to be heard. They have a multi-billion-dollar stadium, right? And it's gonna be gentrified in no time. And those people are asking, what about our homes? What about us? What about our communities? And one of those kids might take the spray paint to go, my nickname is Razor. You know what I mean? And that's what they're gonna be writing to say, I exist. This is my neighborhood. I was born here. But every weekend there's a sold out soccer game and they don't know that we live here. They're not getting the resources. So this is connected and it will continue to be connected to vandalism as long as there aren't resources to our communities. You know, it's hard to separate from the outside looking in, but these are the symptoms that happen, you know, to marginalized communities. Out of that, we get amazing artists that are able to push through those walls. You know, so it's a bit of a process. Again, ideally, we want to inspire and teach our youth to not go that route and to kind of refocus their energy and go straight into designing their own clothing lines, flyers, you know, like promote their services in a way that's not the thing that the youth in the 70s and 80s did. But it will continue to happen. you know. So there's this duality to it, you know.
So with the Vanishing Point collection, what do you want people to take away from it when they view it? Is there anything that you're, I guess you kind of explained it, you know, within our talk, the thought evoking, the emotional evoking things that come out of graph here is just such a rich culture that I didn't know a lot about. I knew I wanted this here in the space, but I didn't know much about the history or anything, but it's an extremely rich culture.
Yeah, yeah, you know, it's like, you know, graffiti as its own culture, it exists way before hip hop culture. All hip hop did was unite it or bring it in and say, oh, you're the visual artistic paint form that we're missing in this movement that we are yet to have a name for. So it predates hip hop, long before hip hop, right? Because again, remember, social, economic, political. Long before breaking and DJing and all of that, right? Now what I hope the viewer, amongst other things, is to say like how rich hip hop culture is. The dancers here that know me know my fight and my plight and my work to inspire people to really honor hip hop culture, because it took all of these things and said, rock with us. We could move together as a unit, and then we have like the 4 elements of hip hop. There are more, but the 4 artistic elements of hip hop, right? DJing, MCing, graph, and breaking, right? No particular order, with the exception of music. Music comes first. But that's the thing, like it brought, every culture has music, dance, art, and instrumentation. Every culture. Hip hop is an extension of everyone's culture. Anybody can take part in it, right? It's now the biggest selling genre of music. Who would have thought? You know what I mean? And so I hope that this body of work inspires people who love hip hop, people who love style writing, people who love the medium spray paint, to see how far they can take it.
So where can we find you? Social media?
At Teknyc, T-E-K, at Teknyc. My crew, Skill Methodz, my crew, FC. Fame City Kings is the name of the handle there. There's a lot of information there for all the artists. Like in our crew, there's some really famous artists, style writers, like Cause is one that has really catapulted, K-A-W-S. You know, like he just catapulted. He's like a globally known artist that comes from this. You know, like I just painted with him last month. You know, he's still painting. And he's like this, it feels sometimes like an out of touch person because he's so big, but he's not, because he's still honoring this art form, you know. So guys can find me there, find me usually, hopefully at a local jam, and I'll continue to do the work that I think is important to preserve the authenticity of hip hop culture, you know.
Thank you so much. You're amazing, and again, who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Thank you for the opportunity.